with us today. My name is Caterina Marinetti, and I work as Scientific Project Manager for the NEWAVE Innovative Training Network. Today is the 10th appointment of the thematic seminar series as part of the NEWAVE Diffused conference, which started at the beginning of April and will be accompanying us until the end of the year with bi-weekly online webinars. The thematic seminars feature the NEWAVE early stage researchers who will guide us through the key water governance aspects that they have been investigating during the NEWAVE project. Today's seminar, we start with Javier Rodríguez-Ros lecture titled Spatialities of Water Reallocation in River Basin Governance, the case of the Segura in Spain. Javier is a PhD researcher at the Institute of Research for Development in Montpellier, France. His background as agricultural engineer working in development projects developed his interest on agroecology and water governance, which he addressed from a political ecology and critical geography perspective. Javier's research project explores the production and instrumentalization of water scarcity on multiple scales, from community-based irrigation to river basin governance. Specifically, he investigates power dynamics in the Segura River Basin, an iconic case of basin closure whose experience may inform similar cases of the Mediterranean basins. Together with Javier, we welcome his PhD supervisor, Francois Moll, Director of Research at the Institute of Research for Development in France, and the invited discussant, Marta Garcia Moya. Marta currently works at the Valencian Center for Irrigation Studies at the Polytechnic University of Valencia. Marta does research in environmental science, water science, and irrigation water management. I kindly remind you all that you can submit your questions anytime during the seminar using the Q&A function. Thank you so much and enjoy the seminar.
Thank you, Caterina, and hi everyone. Thank you very much for being here. And I would like to especially say thanks to Marta Garcia Moya for being the discussion for this presentation, especially being regional holidays in Valencia today. So buena diada, Marta, and anyone watching from Valencia. So this presentation is titled Spatialities of Water Reallocation in River Basin Governance, and is a short review of some of the main results obtained during my PhD. But before we delve into what this means, I will introduce the structure of this presentation, which has 5 sections. The introduction, where I will present the analytical framework, then some background of the Spanish context and the Segura River Basin, which is located in the southeast of the country, and then the findings, which are divided in 3 sections, where I will present case studies at different scales, from the micro scale of the communities of irrigators to the whole Segura River Basin. Then I will present some elements for discussion and some preliminary conclusions of the research. So what does it mean, the spatialities of water reallocation? Well, it is simply the study of water redistribution embedded in sociospatial and power relations. For the analysis of sociospatial relations, I draw on the notion of hydrosocial territories as spatially bound multiscalar networks, adding the notion of placemaking, which I find interesting and useful for the microscale. And on the other hand, I structure the analysis of power in 4 axes: the structural power, pragmatic, by design power, and discursive. And these, well, I find these particular dimensions to be useful and relevant for closed basins, which means basins where water demands outstrip supply, whose governance is much about water allocation influenced by power and wealth imbalances. So my general research question is, how is water scarcity embedded in spatial power relations and instrumentalized in multiscalar river basin governance? And we will look into some specific questions, specifically, very briefly, the historical and political grounds of the basin governance in the Segura, the micro level, looking into the irrigation transformations and how they have been influenced and shaped social, political, and spatial relations. The mesoscale will look into how or why water policies are failing to address the process of closure in some of these tributaries. Sorry. And then at the macro level, we'll look into the regional powers, so how they have shaped the reality and the meaning of basin governance in the Segura. Overall, I'm also interested in looking into by which mechanisms water is being gradually transferred into intensive and capitalistic agriculture. So in Spain, the total irrigated area has tripled since the beginning of the last century, and mainly developing water supply, which is known as the hydraulic mission. This has been marked by state-driven policies that increased water supply throughout different periods. And we don't have the time to look into them, but well, some of the key milestones in the allocation of water under these policies are the creation of river basin authorities, the Confederaciones Hidrográficas, the National Water Act or Law in 1985, and the Water Framework Directive. As we will see, some of the, well, modernization has been one of the most important policies and playing a key role in the last 30 years in sustaining this growth, even though it was a little bit calmed when it was supposed to be limited, often entailing water reallocations and expansions from supposed water savings. Now, in the context of the Segura, it is important to note that it encompasses 4 regions and that it is crossed by 2 large-scale infrastructures that supply water for agriculture and urban consumption, which are the Mancomunidad de Canales del Taivilla for urban consumption and the Aqueduct Tagus Segura for agricultural and urban uses. In this basin, the River Basin Authority distinguishes between 3 main subsystems, which are the surface water supplied by the main 3 rivers of the basin and yearly allocated depending on the volumes stored in the reservoirs. But there are also other territories that historically have been irrigated based on surface water outside of this system of allocation regarded in the plans. The second subsystem is the Tagus Segura transfer, which is dividing those areas with access to the basin surface water and those without, or can be divided like that. And the third one is the groundwater subsystem developed all along the basin with special relevance in the north and in the south. So this overdevelopment of groundwater irrigation is particularly relevant because it has led to the overexploitation of 2/3 of the aquifers in the basin. And it means, or it remains, a major problem of governance in the basin, which has experienced also a boost in other sources such as wastewater reuse or desalination for irrigation in the last 2 decades. This shows the complexity of the water distribution in the basin, which is characterized by 3 main factors, which are that most of the systems, they depend on multiple sources to satisfy agricultural water demands, that such demands exceed supply, particularly in 2 subsystems, as we will see, and that this has led to an enduring river basin closure, which increases the interconnection between agricultural systems. So to investigate the problem of closure and to unravel this complexity, I started investigating the impact of the implementation of irrigation policies in 3 communities. These are the communities, the projects of modernization and social irrigation in Férez, Agramón, and Calasparra. Unfortunately, we don't have the time to detail all of them, but I will present some general key findings of these cases. So generally, we have identified forced reorderings of local water governance by which the processes of implementation of modernization and social irrigation have been quite clearly top-down. And we will start by some factors, which are there has been a general deproblematization of the social and agrarian changes that were brought about by these policies. In the case of Férez, which applies to Agramón and other small towns in the basin, there has been a steady decrease on the population and of the spring water flows as well. But rather than developing projects based on local irrigators' needs, there has been local elites who have managed to influence decisively on water management by over-abstracting water from municipal or substitution irrigation wells. That is, in summary, solving problems of groundwater over-abstraction through more groundwater abstraction. Anyhow, the pretended fixation of population that these projects targeted has not occurred. And in some towns like Calasparra, where there has been some growth, this has occurred mainly through migrant workers that settled in and work for large agribusiness companies, but are frequently in very precarious conditions, moving along different areas on the region rather than being fixed, let's say fixed. So besides irrigation transformations, they have entailed a structural dismantling of communal irrigation practices, and bottom-up initiatives of the commoners to modernize have been pretty regularly neglected and substituted by expert knowledge, while the management functions of the new infrastructures and technologies have been concentrated in a reduced elite, often by establishing parallel institutions like cooperatives that were settled to have access to subsidies. And this has led to insertion of the three communities, in these cases, to regional networks through the representation of municipal or local authorities, entailing a bureaucratization of their practices and the homogenization of communal irrigation structures. Also, the pretended water savings that were targeted have been frequently traded downstream, pointing to a structural water redistribution through these projects. Now, regarding the role of the state, their actions do not seem to have contributed to a more democratic, inclusive, or effective approach to water governance, achieving neither social cohesion nor environmental sustainability. The development of these projects has been largely driven by practical arrangements led by private interests, with much permissiveness from the Confederation, in this case, with irregularities. This has led to multiplying the number of actors involved, limiting the agency of the commoners, and often the irrigators have been immersed in disputes between traditional and modernized systems, constituting a sort of parallel places, and invariably ending in larger benefits for private actors that control the irrigation transformation projects. Now, at the meso level, we have studied the interactions of irrigation systems and territories in the context of a closing subbasin. And this is the Argos River, tributary of the Segura in the west part. Here, agribusiness is thriving on groundwater use since the 90s, but despite this expansion, as we can see, it is still one of the two territories of the basin where intensive groundwater is theoretically not reverting into a poor global status of the aquifers. So let's explore if this is so and why very schematically. Here, irrigation has historically been concentrated in four territories, the one downstream being one of the cases studied at the micro level, the case of Calasparra. And upstream, where most of the springs are concentrated, there has been a reduction, a very strong reduction of the flows to a third of their original values due to the decrease in rainfall and increased groundwater exploitation since the 60s. This initially led to protests by historical communities of irrigators, but it seems that, well, to have gradually evolved to groupings of small systems in larger communities, and to the interconnections between communal and private systems, performing some informal redistributions in the upstream part particularly. Also, water of the upstream communities has historically been returned to systems downstream, but it was done before by returning through return flows and then abstracting water from the river. Nowadays, with the modernizations, these connections that have been established, they bypass the river. And besides, most of the communities now account with substitution wells, and some of them even with wastewater from the two towns upstream and in the middle part, enhancing water supply even though there's a clear agricultural demise in this area. But what is more striking about this evolution is that not only the river is bypassed, but the inflows to the Argos Reservoir, they have increased throughout the last 2 decades, despite the decreased rainfall trend, which points to a hypothetical use of wells to boost water availability downstream. Now, in conclusion, water distribution in this subbasin has been rescaled with the absence of the state to regulate and monitor groundwater dynamics and environmental flows. Groundwater over abstractions and water use in intensive schemes have been scantily addressed, despite the previous research pointing in that direction. As we said, there were some protests about over abstraction from some communities, but they seem to have turned into informal arrangements and water redistribution with the agribusiness, reaching a sort of equilibrium that has been uncritically assumed by the state. Even though the aquifer is considering good global state, there's still a huge burden of this arrangement of the current situation that impacts the river and also the smallholders within these communities. The environmental flows of the Argos River, they also suffer from the determination of very low values, which are only physically monitored downstream of the reservoir. And despite the modernizations and theoretical water savings, flows have not been accomplished during the last planning cycle in the downstream part. However, I couldn't find any kind of reflection on the reasons for this in the plans or monitoring reports of the Basin Authority, which is a bit striking. Importantly, we have also observed in this subbasin that water rights are quite irrelevant regarding actual water distribution, which I find very interesting. Supply is enhanced formally through, for instance, collective and on-farm reservoirs and substitution wells, but also informally through unmonitored over-abstractions and water trading between CIs. Now, at the macro scale, we'll look into how basin governance is rationalized, specifically in river basin and drought management plans. And like as I said in the beginning, the River Basin Authority subdivides irrigation demands in 3 subsystems. 2 of them register a water deficit according to the plans, and these are the Tagus Segura transfer, which is known as the application deficit, and the groundwater subsystem due to non-renewable pumping. So the total deficit of the basin has been reduced according to the last 3 plans, this corresponds to the growth in water supply for the Tagus Segura transfer dependent systems, mainly through desalinated water. And in turn, the groundwater deficit has barely been reduced, while demands have supposedly decreased. And this is particularly interesting in the context of my research. We'll look into that in a bit. But yeah, we must say that indeed water supply due to rainfall changes in the rainfall patterns have decreased since the 1980s, and the allocation system had to be adapted. But the traditional systems have got the worst part of this reduction, with higher percentage cuts than those of the transfer. And besides the new allocation rules for surface water, they incorporate indicators of the resources of the Tagus, inserting their interest or water needs in the surface water subsystems. Also, the other deficit, which is the groundwater deficit, presents different problems which relate to over-allocation of water rights, groundwater rights in the Northeast, proliferation of illegal wells, particularly well known in the South, but also some governance problems, which are the lack of implementation of communities of groundwater users to ensure the sustainability of overexploited aquifers. They do not parallel or equal the 2/3 of overexploited aquifers in the basin. And these problematic is leading to extensions for the declaration of good global status for the aquifers according to the Water Framework Directive. So some of them are being postponed even after 2039. Altogether, the increase of water supply has given continuity to the principles of the hydraulic mission, falling, from my perspective, into a reductionist framing of water scarcity. River basin management plans, they focus on water deficit, very extensively on quantitative determination of this deficit, with little analysis of the social and environmental problems linked to it. And this is particularly problematic in the calculation of water demands, like I said before, because they occupy a big part of the basin plans, but they are largely based on estimations. We have found numerous inconsistencies in this process of determination of a deficit that is inherently political, but there is very little reflection on redistribution practices, compliance with what rights in terms of quantity or perimeters, and the causes of non-compliance with Water Framework Directive goals. Also, the measures foreseen in drought plans, they have contributed to consolidate the hegemony of the systems of the transfer. Very briefly, we'll say that the plans consider 4 units of drought and scarcity in the basin, we being the main system, the one with access to extra supply in case of drought, with drought wells and growing capacity of desalination plants. These are even projected to pump water for up to the main weir of the Tagus Segura transfer, where water is diverted for these systems. So it is important to note that the total irrigated area, despite the information of the plan has expanded since 1988, even though there were some regulations to avoid this. And this occurred through the irrigation of previously rain-fed crops, the consolidation of illegal expansions, and overlooking the compliance with legal perimeters and other factors that we have already discussed. But what is important to mention finally in this macro level is that these features have strengthened the power of a sort of regional iron triangle made by cross-scale networks of actors, regional bureaucracy in media, and private interest groups, mainly formed by the Union of Users of the Transfers Segura, the Tagus to Segura, and the Agro-Export Federations. So their strategy has been mainly based on the depoliticization of water governance in the basin, systematically linked to regional economic development. But the benefits for local irrigators and rural societies, as we saw, is more than questionable. And very often, the benefit of the transfer is linked also to a national interest, drawing on very abstract discourses that relativize the impact of agribusiness, and have been assumed by far-right parties. These parties, well, if we do a discourse analysis, even of the visual or semiotic aspect, we will see very close relations, and also politically they are quite well known, and they invite people to continue irrigating and to, well, be not very careful about the limitations and the consequences of the restricted supply. So very briefly to discuss some elements of this presentation, I think, well, I will structure them in the power dimensions that I mentioned at the beginning. And I think, like I said, that despite the relative decentralization in the last years or decades, there has been a continuation of the hydraulic mission networks and discourses. This goes through a never-ending, we could say, basin overbuilding through public and private financing. And the modernization and the kind of development that is going on is unfolding through a kind of a uniform modernization that is pretty systematically enhanced through enhanced groundwater access. So for me, this enacts a sort of an organic colonization of the space. We should remind that the hydraulic mission in the beginning was very closely linked to the politics of inner colonization, and I think that this politics of letting do and then regulating, are structural, and since the 1950s they have been ongoing and perpetuating this hydraulic mission. At the level of design, I think that there are some flaws in the regulations and the plans that have dealt or translated into a centralization of decision-making in communal spaces, the establishment of parallel institutions that blur the responsibilities of the commoners, and also the promotion of general communities of irrigators with unclear goals, always with more subsidies and consolidation of illegal uses, while the monitoring and even the setting of environmental flows is a bit flawed or improvable, let's say. The pragmatic dimension, I think that, well, we discussed this in the mesoscale. There has been growing over abstraction, but also interconnections between communal and private systems, which is a classic part of this closure of the basins. And very remarkably, I think that water rights are not anymore guiding the distribution of water due to these interconnections and fuzziness of the limits. And what I think is that what the trend is that water distribution in these scales are going through a more sort of pools of rights where the water endowments are traded between commoners or systems. So lastly, at a discursive level, I think that there's still a stubborn promotion of water savings as an adaptive strategy, despite all evidence of rebound effects and expansions in the basin. And that these plans and basin plans and drought plans, they are a huge display of technical hydrological rationality that reinforce the authority despite all the estimations and all the claims that sort of depoliticize the display of the deficit. So, well, besides that, I've seen that there's a sort of a turn to water governance and water security and planning, while the hydraulic emission principles are subtly defended. And this is my last slide. To draw 5 conclusions, I think that, again, the hydraulic emission is pervading in current national and regional policies too, fostering these state control developments. That at the micro level, there has been a sort of instrumentalized or convenient for some actors coexistence of places that were traditional and then modernized, coexisting parallelly, leading to very important conflicts at a local but also regional level. That historical networks or oligarchies they continue to underpin on the groundwater distribution rather than the projected realities of water rights and planning. And if planning they do not represent the reality, they are representing the interest of some actors, which are these regional elites that promote and look for this water reallocation to intensive uses. So for me, I think that this sustained water scarcity that has been going on since the 50s in the Segura, it's emerging as a private interest, but also as a public concession to these informal and capitalistic water uses. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm really looking forward to the comments of François, Marta, and all of you. I don't know if I should stop sharing my screen, Kate, or...
Yeah, I think that's okay. I think Francois is with us. Yes.
Struggling to get back to the screen. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody who is online. And thanks, Javier. Thanks a lot for this inspiring presentation. I'm really glad to see your work coming to fruition with a wealth of insight, which I think are quite original in the Spanish context. Just going through, I mean, a few remarks about your 3 level of analysis. So the detailed investigation of the micropolitics of irrigation modernization, which in your writing is of course much more developed that you were able to show just in a few minutes, but I found that really really fascinating. You take us basically from a heroic narrative of technological fix of the water crisis, supported by a benevolent state and implemented by enthusiastic farmers. You take us to what's in reality is the intricate transformation of both the social and the material part of this community. But in the thesis, you have 3 case studies which largely sort of resonate with one another. One might question, of course, whether these 3 cases are representative of the modernization of irrigation across Spain as a whole. So there are certainly distinctive features in all these modernization schemes. I think the technical options vary, the type of farming, the type of farmers, the degree of connection to the market, and things like that. And I think your work will be a great source of inspiration for hopefully further PhD students to specifically focus on that issue, and maybe targeting a larger number of irrigation communities in Spain or maybe in the Segura Basin, and maybe try to make a typology of how these social and environmental physical factors contribute to different types of output. What you show also the ambiguous role of the states and how local elites are able to coerce other farmers into accepting the modernization project, while at the same time furthering their own interest. So there are bureaucratic interests and logics out there, but also kind of political, financial interests that are revealed in the process. So I think that's a very, not only great job, but a useful analysis that you've done. On the meso level case, Again, I think the detailed unpacking of how the communal irrigation systems of that Argos basins, how they are interconnected, is quite fascinating. It's not only, as you show, a classic sort of upstream, downstream type of interdependence, but it's all the intertwining of these surface and groundwater resources. While saying that, I'm making the usual mistake of referring to surface and groundwater as two distinct sources, but in fact, it's only the same water. So what your account shows is that the logic that takes some irrigation communities to increase their supply through the wells actually impact those who depend on the groundwater. So that really creates even more intricate connectivity between within the basin. So at the end, yeah, indeed, as you stress, that if you read the story from an efficiency, you could have a story, saying that, the basins become very efficient. But as you stress, it's just that the base flow going back to the river is actually who is on the losing end of the story. So what you show is the transformation of what used to be, actually, for the people who listen to and not familiar with the basin, but that used to be a permanent river, and it has become an intermittent river through this sort of depletion of the return flow. So this process of making ramblas, this sort of intermittent reserve, so the ramblatization, we could say, something quite widespread in Spain, but other Mediterranean countries. So I think it's an interesting point to show, how environment, even the perception of people of what these rivers are, has been changing, and people don't even realize that they used to be rivers in the full sense. And last, so for the yeah, and also, I mean, you show the remoteness of the state. I think you well emphasized that the water rights were just paper numbers, but that what is really happening on the ground in terms of the actual circulation of water, it's quite far and distant from the state, and also from the pretense of controlling water volumetrically, by the state apparatus. And at the macro level, so yeah, the whole narrative of scarcity that is maintained while irrigation is still expanding. So that's quite fascinating. There are many dimensions to this story, but of course, as you stress, the highly political support given to intensive agriculture in the basin. One aspect I'd like to mention in finishing, that could be also the object of further study, that I've found fascinating, is this datafication associated with the River Basin Master Plan. So as you said, they are there to enhance the legitimacy of the Confederation, and they do that by this massive production and mobilization of numbers. So what is fascinating is that these numbers are extremely uncertain, and there's a range of choice in all these parameters and numbers, but the water balance at the end eventually says exactly what managers and politicians would like them to say. So I think there's really some great topic here on showing how these numbers are produced and made available, but in fact, in a certain way, they are aggregated according to the logic of the presentation that is chosen by the Confederation in the River Basin Plan. So, yeah, there's also really a need to unpack this production of knowledge through numbers. Well, all in all, and to the limited extent of my knowledge of the Spanish literature on irrigation water management, I'm really convinced your work will be very seminal and a source of inspiration for other PhD students in the future. So, in other words, Well done, Javier, for the work and the presentation. With these few remarks, now I'm handing the floor to Marta, who works at the Valencian Center for Irrigation Studies.
Hi, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank Javier and Francois for his invitation to be here today and to share his presentation. I teach agricultural economics en la Universidad Politécnica de Valencia. I am also a researcher in el Centro Valenciano de Estudios del Riego of the same university. My field of research is the economics, the policy, and the governance of irrigation water. And my work has been carried out mainly in the Júcar Basin, which is just north of the Segura Basin. I am more familiar with the Júcar Basin, which is also a closed basin, and although it's a very complicated territory, it does not have the level of complexity that Segura Basin has. Javier research offers us a deep insight into the processes underlying the transformation that are taking place in the Segura irrigation system. And I think that his contribution is valuable because based on a solid conceptual and analytical framework, he has managed to understand these processes in depth. And I believe that his thesis is an example of what doctoral research should be, something that is not common nowadays, since in my opinion, research should serve not only to academics, but also to society. I would also highlight I would also like to highlight the field work that Javier has carried out. Those of us who have been working in the agricultural sector in Spain for years, especially in the field of irrigation, know how difficult it is to have this information, establishing the necessary relationships of trust with farmers and irrigation communities take time and take dedication. But it is fundamental to understand these processes of irrigation transformation and the evolution of the communal relations in different contexts. For me, commenting Javier's presentation is not easy because of the diversity of aspects it covers, as you could see, as well as the complexity of the relations between the different actors, which are often difficult to understand and sometimes deliberately opaque. However, there are several points I would like to highlight, which appear in the Javier analysis at the 3 spatial scales. First, I would like to talk about the misnamed modernization of irrigation, which is a euphemism for technological change. Since the 80s of past century, this modernization has been the main policy of public administration in Spain to supposedly save water. Despite numerous studies questioning the effectiveness of these savings, modernization subsidies policies have continued without significant change. The use of the term modernization in Spain to refer to technological change is not neutral. It's used by various actors, both public and private, to project an image of efficiency in water use. I strongly believe in modernization in agriculture through technological change, digitization, improvements in management, training of technicians, farmers. However, I think that the modernization should make life easier for farmers and contribute to a more structured Spanish territory, but not in this way, not in this way that Javier has shown us. In many cases, to manage irrigation water with these new technologies, it requires some specific knowledge that is not easy to achieve for farmers and technicians in the irrigation communities. And Javier has explained the technological transformation has been used to dismantle communal management of resources, introducing new actors that generally are private companies that offer installation, maintenance, and a variety of services in the irrigation sector, and privatizing or outsourcing services that were traditionally provided by the irrigation communities themselves. This outsourcing of tasks might lead to a loss of control on the processes of the irrigation communities. It should be kept in mind that modernization are carried out with a considerable amount of public aid that is financed by all of us, no, taxpayers. Therefore, the role of the states in these processes cannot be limited to financing and disappear. As many authors have pointed out, irrigation modernization policies should follow a process of ex-ante and ex-post evaluation. Moreover, these policies should include a wide range of measures that improve water use efficiency and not be based only on the installation of irrigation infrastructure. The participation of public administration in these processes is essential to ensure that all stakeholders, especially the smallest and most vulnerable, can participate in decision-making. They should also ensure that improved efficiency translates into reduced water use without increasing consumption or selling to other users in a closed basin, such as the Segura. Although it might seem obvious, it's important to remember that the state must guarantee sufficient ecological flow and that any technological transformation must not lead to environmental damage. Another important aspect that I want to talk about that is reflected in Javier's research is the role of the water planning in water allocation. Since 1985 water law in Spain, all water actions are subjected to planning. Since the European Water Directive of 2000, all river basins districts must publish their plans every 6 years. These plans, besides containing a huge amount of information on the status of water bodies, have the main objective of allocating resources between the different uses. Spanish legislation establishes that the deficits in the basins must be fixed in the national hydrological plan. However, the deficits that have been occurring in different basins have no easy solution, and since 2001, no government has dared to draw up a national hydrological plan. This problem has not been addressed in Spain for more than 20 years. We don't have a national hydrological plan for more than 20 years. The planning process, which is particularly complex in a closed basin such as the Segura or the Júcar, involves negotiation between the different users in which existing power relations are manifested in a more or less valid way. For these processes to be efficient, it's necessary to have the real figures and to know and properly account for the savings from modernization. In the case of the Segura Basin, Javier has shown us the calculation methodologies are not clear, suggesting that there is a lack of transparency in the planning processes with the aim of showing an artificial good status of water bodies to continue increasing irrigation surface area and overexploiting aquifers. It's also crucial that information is available and can be understood to all users. As in the case of irrigation modernization, planning should give a voice to the less favored users rather than benefiting large users and agribusinesses. Despite the governance problems that Javier has shown us, I believe it's essential to value Spanish experience of irrigation communities as a true example of communal management. These communities function relatively well in the case of those that use surface water, and they face more difficulties in the case of those that use groundwater, where in many cases sustainable aquifers are not achieved. This difference in management is partly due to the fact that the entities that use surface water have a long tradition and have their own tools for resolving conflicts. Administration faces difficulties in adequately control water consumption in the groundwater uses. Underlying all these aspects that I have commented on and that appear in the Javier's thesis is a lack of action on the part of the state, or an action in the opposite direction that we should expect from the state, manifested, among others, in the scant control over the effects of modernization processes and in the illegal reallocation of resources that come from these processes. Faced with the figure and as a part of the university community, but also a part of the society that I'm interested in promoting sustainable agriculture and also the good state of our water bodies, I would ask Javier, how is it possible that the discourse of the far right, which promote unsustainable use of resources, are gaining ground in the society of the Segura Basin? And also, how do you think the status of the aquifers and water bodies in this basin will evolve in the future? And I would like to end my intervention thanking Javier and François again for the invitation and congratulating Javier for his work. I think it's a very, very interesting work, and I think that also in Spain, this work is going to be very useful for us, for the researchers that are based in Spain. And it has been a pleasure for me to be here today with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marta and Francois, for your insights. If I may maybe respond very briefly to some of the points you raised before we have some questions from the audience. And yeah, maybe I will address first of all the two questions asked by Marta, difficult questions, but I think that well, they are important, and I think they are occupying some time in my research. So the rise of the far right in this region, I think that it's not casual. It's one of the regions where there has been a steady growth of Vox, this extreme right political party, and it has emerged in this context very linked to the problems of the rural societies and the agrarian context. I think that, like I mentioned, this hydraulic mission emerged in the context of an inner colonization that was reinforced by authoritarian governments, notably under the Franco regime. And I think that these imaginaries that were promoted at the time of domination of nature, they have been perpetuated in Malthusian narratives of scarcity, particularly when they don't see any problem in the destruction of water ecosystems and environmental in general. No, I think this is interesting because I've reading throughout these 4 years the media, the policy papers, interviewing people. There's a very clear accusation of all ecologist positions as ideological, or even the need to reduce irrigation expansion, or just to limit the expansion, or to limit or to reduce the irrigated areas. They are deemed or labeled as ideological, and I think that that's very it's very interesting, first of all, because from my position, all the positions in basin governance, they can be deemed as ideological, but it is very clearly a strategy, a discursive strategy to cover their goals, right? So these extreme right parties, they have clearly found an opportunity to reinforce their political power through this defense of the principles of hydraulic mission, right? Like increasing supply, interconnecting the river basins in Spain, reinforcing a central national governance of water. But because of the fact that many of the actors in rural areas are suffering from these consequences of capitalistic agriculture, these parties like Vox, they are promising very easy solutions with a very clear lack of reflection of the ecological problems, or even promoting lies and fake news. So, which are very clearly ideological strategies and tools as well. So I think that all these factors, they have contributed to gain popularity in the region and to secure positions that people believe are going to revert in their own interests. And that also links to the second question, which is what I do think are the groundwater, the future of the groundwater bodies in the basin. No, for me, this is a very tricky one because, well, the trends that are being observed by many researchers, and if we look into the basin plus as well, it looks that there's a very difficult position from the authorities to limit this groundwater abstraction and the groundwater deficit. So this increasing utilization of groundwater bodies as water resources for agribusiness schemes, which is what's going on in most of the places, focusing on profit making and paying very little attention to the ecological and social consequences, I think that it's very difficult to be reverted. In the north, most of the water springs, they have been depleted since the 90s, making it a very an area or a territory with a clear absence of surface water courses. And then in the south, there are numerous problems that we didn't have the time to discuss, like land subsidence in the Guadalentín Valley, risk of saline intrusion, all of which are irreversible. So I think that in this scenario of delaying deadlines for achieving good or quantitative and qualitative status of the aquifer, the most logical outcome would be a general desertification and hydrological collapse. I don't know, this is perhaps very discussable, and I would love to continue discussing this issue. But I think that it also links to one of the things that we have been discussing, no? Like, or you pointed at, Marta. I think that this lack of action from the state, Francois also mentioned it. There's an ambiguous role of the state in allowing or intervening and not intervening. But I think that this permissiveness or lack of action, it's also a way of acting and displaying agency. And I think that the responsibility of the state in this, in practice, is also limited. And I think that if we don't see any kind of increase in grassroots movements for the defense of these problems, or denouncing these problems, which occur. There are many environmental NGOs and local associations denouncing and being active, but I think that they need a little bit more promotion, a little bit more presence in the public media and the regional media. If this doesn't occur, the most probable outcome, I believe, is full technification for agribusiness interests, and it really seems to point to towards water depletion or groundwater depletion in the next years. Also bearing in mind that the recuperation of these groundwater bodies would take hundreds of years in many of the cases of over abstraction. So it's a bit pessimistic from my side, but of course, a matter of thought for the coming years.
Thank you, Javier, for that answer. So, one question going back to the modernization process. Juan Pablo is asking whether there would be a way for this modernization projects to be more democratic, with more participation, with more say of the users concerned. And after you answer, if Marta, you can elaborate on that based on the situation on the Júcar, because I think I remember from one of the conversation that the Acequia Real or others, they had a process that was, if I remember, well accepted by farmers. And so do you find also this sort of range of modernization from well accepted to really opposed, but still a bit imposed on people? So maybe just Javier for the first.
Thank you, Francois. If I understood well, like you're asking about the dynamics of acceptance and assumption of these modernization projects, right? Yeah, it's interesting because I also raised that point before. Yeah, I didn't mention this explicitly in the research because I did in other presentations, but it is important to say that this lack of action from the state and these factors that we have discussed, they resulted in very coercive means for the transformation of the systems. It is important to say that most of, like Marta said, most of the people, they are in the cases I studied, they are willing to modernize, to improve the systems, but they propose a very broad set of means, and providing their technical knowledge, which exists, the historical knowledge, very context situated, and there's a lot of discussions in these systems going on, but there has been very coercive means to limit that discussion, to take it to expert knowledge, and to change the course of action. I think that there are many cases that I could mention, but the options provided to the farmers are very limited very often. And Yeah, I know that in most of the people, they want to modernize, but it's like that's not the way that people want to modernize, and they are very clearly, in many cases, trying to make that explicit. So I think that the diversity of means that has been deployed is very limited, and that the aspect of coercion has not been addressed sufficiently in research, and I think it's important. All these dynamics of local governance, the influence of the elites, of the oligarchies, families, it goes into very detailed process or very complex process that deserve further research of the everyday practices from a hydrological perspective to anthropological perspectives as well of the places and the dynamics that go on. So I think that's something to bear in mind. I'm curious to know what Marta thinks.
No, I would like to say to Francois that I think that hookah is really different. It's close and it's a complex system too, but it's really different because here we have some irrigation communities that are an example, as I said before, of communal management. So in this case, the farmer are they are taking decisions, they are participating in the decision making process. So I think it's really different. In the case of Fiqueral is different to others in examples in the basin because they have a lot of subsidies. The state pay them the 100% of the modernization because they were owners of the Alarcón, del embalse Alarcón. So I don't know the name. Could you hear me? Yeah. So I think the Fiqueral is a really different, and also they have a very good staff of technicians, but in general in the Júcar Basin, the irrigation communities are willing to modernize it because they want to have the modernization because they aren't farmers during. They aren't farmers because they have another occupation. They work in another, not just in the, because we have a very small size of exploitation. So they work in another occupation. So they wanted, the majority of the farmers want to have the modernization system for irrigation because they have to work less in the farm. So I think it's really different. The Júcar Basin from the Segura Basin, until they are close, they are complex system, they are both close. But I think the things that Javier has told us are impossible that happen in the Júcar Basin.
Okay. Caterina, I understand because I was looking at the Q&A, but I understand there were messages coming in the chat in parallel. So we have an interesting question from Sergio Contreras on whether, Javier, you validated your narratives with the primary stakeholders in the region, the farmer, agro-industry, political parties, and particularly the Segura River Basin Confederation.
So yeah, thank you, Sergio, for the question. So my work has been very, I have really enjoyed working with leaders and communities of irrigators and commoners in the different communities of irrigators and learning from them and exchanging. I could do focus groups, I could do many interviews, participant observation. And my narrative, as you say, that's a very interesting way to say it. It's very, I would say it's validated. It's very aligned to critical stances of water governance and modernization, but also water governance in general in the region. It is important to say that, well, there has been denounced from the portals of transparency in the region of Murcia, denouncing the lack of transparency that exists with regard to access to information, distribution practices, water consumption. And like Francois said, this is very difficult also to metrically monitor and to control. It's sort of an utopia, but it's important to say that also there's the other side, which is hindering the access to this information and making things complex, let's say. So no, I don't think the Segura River Basin Authority validates this narrative, but it was also a bit difficult to communicate with them. They are supposed to be partners of the NEWAVE program, and when I wrote them and tried to make interviews, they have been quite elusive. So I'm sure they will have different stances of it. But I know also that there are many communities of irrigators and many associations and local organizations that have been doing a great job, and they do have different information, not the one that is hegemonic or dominant in the basin. So I think it's important to make this visible and to make this accessible to the people, because most of these cases are very often disconnected from each other, and they are completely absent from the media. So I think this narrative that it's also aligned with the Fundación Nueva Cultura del Agua and with other organizations, I think that it thrives on the local knowledge and experiences.
Yeah, I'm wondering whether Sergio meant that your narrative should be validated or not. It's behind the question, and indeed, I mean, it's a critical narrative which doesn't align well with the official narrative, and it's more an attempt to deconstruct precisely how water scarcity is defined, is managed, is used. So yeah, probably the River Basin Authority would not agree. But the thing is that I think Javier has tried quite a lot to engage with the people at the Confederation precisely to get more information on a number of points which were not very clear, on a number of data and stuff like that. And they have been remarkably elusive and very hard, to get any answer from them. So, whether that says something also about the lack of transparency behind this display of numbers, which is quite impressive, and that at the end you may ask whether it is a protective shield also for not opening up on different issues. So I think, well, Javier has a lot of anecdotes on how he was turned down in different ways, nicely or brutally, but then which for some reason indicates that getting information was not easy. The second question, maybe we have time, from Sergio, was whether actually you are pointing to how intensive agriculture is being allocated more water. So what is the role of the market as more indefinite players, but definitely very important by the signals that the market sends on what is possible and desirable, and therefore driving possibly water and agrarian dynamics?
Yeah, very interesting question. I think that there has been some reports even from unions, of agrarian unions, like the COAG, I believe it was, that were denouncing the financiarization of agriculture in this basin, and the growing power that investment funds and big financing actors they have in this basin. I know that there's also federations of users that admit smallholders even in some parts, middle farmers in terms of socioeconomic dimension. But we can see many clear examples of this financialization and the changes that they are having in some of the regions. I'm thinking, for instance, in the Argos Basin, we can find table grape vineyards, which are spreading along the basin, also in Yecla, in different places, in Agramon, and they are all very. It's interesting how they are unfolding through social policies, for social irrigation policies, for instance. As we said, these social irrigation projects are supposed to develop local agriculture, but in Agramon, these projects were benefiting only one company that was growing food for agro-export and falling in these dynamics of capitalistic financialized agriculture that turns towards the big market. So I think that they are playing a big influence. My research is not that very much focused on the economic side of the macro scale, macro, beyond the basin level. But I think they are definitely playing a role, and there are other researchers doing a very interesting job in that sense, and also unions producing very valuable information.
Thank you. I think, Katerina, I should be handing over the floor to you again, or
yes, I don't know how much. I don't know how much time Javier still has, but I see also some few questions more on the Q&A chat. So in the other chat, we mix it up a bit this time.
yeah. So
maybe
okay,
we can take 2 maximum.
Okay. Yeah, I've seen that. So from Nuria, you mentioned as one of the lessons at the basin level that the lack of action of the state, the laissez-faire, is followed by a process of re-regulation with clear goals, moving the system in a certain direction. Could you mention an example of this re-regulation process?
Yeah, okay, that's interesting because I'm not sure I'm getting, I think I do. I'm not sure I said explicitly regulation, but it works. I don't know, in terms of the laissez-faire, I'm thinking on, for instance, the consolidation of illegal water uses there has been in Águilas, in the south part of the region, for those who don't know the basin. But in the coast, there has been a very steady increase of agriculture through informal expansions that have been lately regulated by the state institutions, let's say consolidating, that's the word, the official words used, to incorporate their demands into the water system. So that definitely plays a role in the increase of water demands in the basin. And not only that, if water demands are supposed to be decreasing, they are taking water from somebody else in the basin, I would say. But anyhow, that would be one thing. Another one that I come up with, I think that the whole idea of units of agrarian demand that was developed and proposed in the basin plans in 1998, I think that it's also a re-regulation of the Water Act. That there was supposed to be there was supposed to be a limitation of the expansion of the irrigation, but then this is a device that appeared in basin plans. I think that in other places of Spain as well, but others, I think that Marta can correct, they are not using gross demands to analyze the reality of the basin. They rather draw on net water demands. So for me, it is very clearly a tool that is used to mix uses, to draw in a way the attention of governance in towards different units than the ones who have the rights or the ones that should be using the water within certain limits. And I think that this is important to stress because it's very clear and present in micro scales with communities of irrigators, but it's very clearly blurred as we grow up. We rescale the analysis and we look into different regions. So I think that this would be 2 examples of how spatially and administratively there has been new regulations that change the direction of governance.
Thank you, Katerina. I think I don't see any other question in the chat.
Yes, and I think Javier also has to go to important appointment. So yes, so I will take it from here. And I will start also with thanking you, Javier, for the very important and relevant research that you presented today, and Marta and Francois for your discussion and remarks. Let me just share my screen for a quick reminder on the next session. So for this month of October, we will actually have 3 webinars for 3 weeks in a row. So next Wednesday, we will welcome Sinafeka Shkirma Wolde, speaking about her research on Adapt or Depart, examining the nexus of scarcity of water and environmental migration in East Africa. The following week, so exactly on the 23rd of October, we will have Marie Belland presenting the seminar titled Between Land and Water, Urban Submergence and Muddy Politics in the Subsiding City. I remind you that especially for SINA, the time changes, so please make sure you have the correct time in your calendar. You can download the updated invitation for your calendars from the email reminder sent from Zoom. And of course, in our website, you can also see the updated list of all the seminars that are upcoming. If you have missed any lecture or you want to rewatch it, you can do so in our YouTube channel. And finally, I take the opportunity to thank our host institutions, partner organizations, and invite you all to follow us on our channels. Thank you so much. And I hope to see you soon next week. Thank you for your